Christian Bölling is a scientific data curator at the Museum für Naturkunde Berlin. With his dual background in both biology and data science, he develops solutions for computational approaches to biodiversity data integration and analysis. And Christian has coordinated the KIEBIDS project together with the Eco AI lab.
So in this talk, I will present the KIEBIDS project that is about implementing a software solution for conducting information extraction from collection labels and potentially also from other written sources. And we estimate that our collections house more than 30 million collection objects. We don't know exactly because some parts of the collections have not been touched for a long time. And we are in the process of updating the infrastructure for the collections and the housing for the collections themselves. So with these millions of objects also comes, in addition, a multitude of associated written records. These range from inventories to travel reports, expedition reports, various types of material like sketches, drawings, written material, diaries, tables, and last but not least, of course, collection labels. Collection labels are surely one type of document that is especially important and especially significant in terms of collection management and also use for collection-based research, because usually each collection object is accompanied by one or more labels in which the most important information about the origin of the object or its provenance are kept. And that means that at the very basic level, these labels give you one data point for the occurrence and abundance of species in the past, which means that they play an important role when looking into trends regarding species occurrence and abundance from now to the past. And it's actually, I would say, the most important source of information about such data from the past. So the mobilization of this data from the collection labels is actually part of a bigger process, of the process of collection discovery and development at the Museum für Naturkunde. And it's not only about digitizing information, but it's also about ensuring proper conservation. The process of handling and updating the collection infrastructure, transferring information that we have about the collections and the individual collection objects into the digital realm and making that information accessible to everyone in various ways. It's actually part of the so-called future plan, which also focuses on an update to the physical structure of the museum. So perhaps it's also important from the outset to say, when we talk about collection discovery, development, and digitization, what do we actually mean when we say we digitize a collection? Well, first of all, of course, it means that where it is useful, where it is possible, we generate digitally encoded image representations of our collection objects. These usually will be 2D images, but they could also, in certain cases where it is especially useful or important, the other types of digitally encoded images like 3D models. But then also, in addition to these images, we think when we talk about digitization about physical object representations as structured, standardized, and extensible data objects. And in quite a number of respects, this perhaps is the most important outcome of a digitization process. Because with this data, you get to share information about the objects and get to integrate information about these objects with other data sources and make multiple types of analysis that also cross domain boundaries. So specifically for the mobilization of collection label data, how do we do it? Essentially, this is a three-part process that corresponds to what we are hoping to do in the collection development and discovery project. First, there's digitization of the written records, specifically of the collection labels. Then we need to extract the information that is presented in analog form on these paper documents. This is the actual process of information extraction, and this is about what the KIEBIDS project is about specifically. And then when it comes to sharing this extracted information, we present the information in versatile and standardized data formats to channel them downstream. For example, using semantic technologies for instance, knowledge graphs. The task of information extraction from digital images of the collection labels can be subdivided mainly in 5 functional steps. So when you start with the image that you've taken with a camera or a scanner, you do some pre-processing, which basically prepares the digital image to have optimal results for the analysis steps that follow. You do layout recognition to identify those image portions which actually contain the information of interest, which are, for example, the image portions that actually show the labels and the lines of text within them. Then there is the step of actual text recognition, that is to recognize individual letters on a syntactic level, the step of semantic parsing, which means that we try to classify what we see in the text and on the picture, parts that denote, for example, institutions or identifiers or taxa or persons. And then as a 5th and final step, entity disambiguation and linking. To make maximum use of the extracted data, we would like to link individual entities that occur in the text to identifiers in authority record repositories, like, for example, Wikidata or the VIAF resource for persons, or of course, Catalog of Life for taxon names. So we have these 5 functional steps: pre-processing, layout analysis, character recognition, semantic parsing, and entity linking. And the goal of the KIEBIDS project was, starting from our requirements for this process, to actually devise and implement an application that would do this for us. And this is what we call the KIEBIDS application. And KIEBIDS stems from the German phrase KI-basierte Extraktion biodiversity-relevanter Daten aus Schriftgut, which translates into AI-based extraction of biodiversity-relevant data from written sources. A key requirement was that these workflows are implemented in a modular fashion so that we can easily adapt workflows or workflow steps when we have different material that we want to extract information from, or if we want to try new technologies to do the information extraction. And a second key requirement was that the inputs and outputs, the data flows, the tests and evaluation governed by a standardized framework. And actually, what we have built is both. It's a framework, and within that framework, a first workflow that actually performs the information extraction. Having the framework is perhaps the most important outcome of this project, because it enables us to easily implement further adapted workflows. The general design principles were, we have a data pipeline architecture. That means that each functional step, as in pre-processing, layout analysis, character recognition, and so on, is realized as one or more modules that operate sequentially in a linear data processing workflow. It is a file-based workflow, which means that the components of the data pipeline operate on full files as input and output. And the modules that actually implement the different functions are loosely coupled and basically stateless. Means that these modules don't retain memory or context between the runs. It is only the input and output files that they need to function. The advantages of this approach is that we will have modularity, good debuggability, potential for parallelization, and ease of maintenance. Cons are perhaps that we have a file input and output overhead, potential latency, and of course, a storage footprint from intermediate files that need to be shared between modules. So first of all, let's look at the inputs and outputs of our data pipeline. What enters the framework and what comes out. So the workflow input is the document image that we get from digitization. And secondly, we have all the configuration parameters for the pipeline and the individual modules that need to be specified and are then taken by the workflow. The output of the workflow is a PAGE-XML file. So we get one PAGE-XML file per input image. Optionally, we also get intermediate data when we run the pipeline in debug mode, or we get evaluation metrics when we run the pipeline in evaluation mode, which requires that we have something to compare to. What is PAGE-XML? PAGE-XML stands for Page Analysis and Ground Truth Elements XML. It is a standardized format for representing layout and content of scanned document images. It is based on a hierarchical XML schema to describe regions such as text, image, tables, lines of text, and actually individual glyphs with coordinates and reading order. The format allows to include various metadata on multiple levels of annotation. It can be about the coarse layout segmentation found in the image to fine-grained character-level transcription annotations. PAGE-XML is widely adopted in document analysis, research, and competitions. And for us, it is a versatile output format that we can then use to channel the data to other downstream applications. Let's go through the individual steps. Pre-processing. Its purpose is to prepare an optimal image input for layout analysis and OCR, optical character recognition. The input apparently is the original image, and the output of this step is a processed image. Currently, we have implemented a pre-processing module based on OpenCV, and in particular, we have implemented processing steps for resizing the image, for grayscale conversion, visual noise reduction, contrast enhancement, and binarization, which are the typical steps of image pre-processing before you go into layout analysis and optical character recognition. So what does it look like? For example, here in this case, we have an image that has not very high contrast, for example, and also has faded writing in some places. And the output of this step would be that we have a black and white image with much more contrast, where background and written text clearly stands out from each other. The second step, layout analysis. Its purpose is to identify image regions of interests. And in our case, this means we want to separate the image regions which actually depict labels. The input is the processed image from the last step, and the output are coordinates of the regions of interest, the bounding boxes. In the current release, we have implemented a module that's based on segment anything. And the output basically is that we have these bounding boxes identifying individual labels. And it is only the content of these bounding boxes which is then subjected to the next step, the character recognition step. So its purpose is to identify character strings and text lines on a syntactic level. The input is the processed image, and the bounding box coordinates. And the output basically is a transcript for each bounding box. We have, in this case, implemented two different modules, one based on EasyOCR and one on Moondream. EasyOCR is a tried and tested solution for optical character recognition. It's very efficient. And with Moondream, we have a module in the pipeline that leverages visual language modeling technology. The added benefit is that this is open source and locally deployable. And in this case, the execution of the Moondream model is parameterized with a prompt. So the prompt is one parameter that is given to the pipeline where it says transcribe all printed and handwritten text on this label of a specimen from a collection for Museum for Natural History, being especially careful to preserve any scientific names, dates, and location information. Maintain the original formatting and line breaks. Most text is in German. And it means that we can, of course, try different prompts as parameters to see whether we can get better results, or if we have specific needs for extraction, we can parameterize the pipeline simply with a different prompt. Let me highlight some of the challenges at this point. So with EasyOCR and Moondream, we have implemented two very capable solutions when it comes to typed text. The performance of handwritten text is poorer, and this definitely is one area where we hope to implement different modules in the future. We have conducted other projects that were primarily about handwritten text and have developed with our cooperators models which are specifically tailored to handwritten text. Then another challenge is that on these labels, we have non-script symbols, which also have important meaning. Like, for example, this red dot, which means we're talking about a type specimen in this case. Then we have such parts such as strike-throughs or additions. And we still have to figure out a good way, first of all, to recognize these different parts, and then also to extract the relations between these different parts of the transcript. And it may well be that you're not interested in strike-throughs because it indicates that this information is no longer valid, but then there may be other use cases where the whole history of changing these microdocuments comes into play. And then a fourth issue that is also the subject of perhaps further development is that it is not so straightforward sometimes to identify a reading order. Like, for instance, when we have multiple parts, a single label that stands side by side. Next step would be semantic parsing on the transcript. to identify portions of text that denote object classes that we are interested in, like, for example, dates or IDs, persons, places. And the output essentially is that certain portions of text are tagged by the text that we have provided in the first place. Currently, we have implemented a module based on spaCy and regular expressions, and it is currently implemented for dates, URIs, biological sex symbols, geographical coordinates, and type specimen signifiers. It is perhaps interesting to point out at this point that we have chosen in the current release a rule-based approach over a statistical approach. And you could ask, is this still AI? Strictly speaking, it is not, because the parameters are not learned in this case, like in a statistical model approach, but we provide the patterns to look for explicitly through the regular expressions. And the fact of the matter is that for certain information facets, like, for example, type specimen signifiers or geographical coordinates, it is pretty straightforward to come up with one or several patterns that can be put as regular expressions and that give you precisely, or in most cases, the result that you desire to identify the corresponding portions of text. And in this case, we get what we want without training procedures, and we know exactly what we're looking for in the transcripts. So this is a reminder that AI-based approaches are very useful in many cases where complex patterns are concerned, but sometimes we can do very well with rule-based approaches. Another point of interest in this case is that in these labels, most of the time are what we could call context-sparse documents. We don't have long texts with sentences and accompanying expressions on either side of the word that we're analyzing. But in many cases, we just have one word or abbreviations or a couple of words that somehow belong together. So this is not the kind of context that we get from usual written sources. And it remains to be seen in further investigations how well we can actually do with statistical approaches in these context-sparse documents. Then the final step of the pipeline is the entity linking. Its purpose is to identify named entities in the transcript with authority records. Its input is the transcript with tags. And currently we have implemented, because these are of special importance to us, the entity linking for geographical entities, for place names through the GeoNames API. This certainly is also something that will evolve in the future for different authority record repositories, like Wikidata, for example, and different types of entities like organizations, persons, or taxonomic names. And one challenge in this is, of course, to evaluate the hits, especially, again, in these context-sparse documents. When we query over an API, then we usually get a list of hits that are sorted somehow. And very often the metrics according to which these hits are sorted don't reflect the actual hit at the top. At least this is our experience on the necessity of expert knowledge in many cases to actually identify the entities that are mentioned in the text. It will be very interesting to see how far we can get with automated approaches to get reliable entity links. Executing these workflows, there are basically three layers in the KIEBIDS application. You have individual workflow runs that conform to a workflow template, you can call it. And then there still is an outer layer that actually deploys and orchestrates the workflows when they run, especially with many files. The KIEBIDS application uses Prefect as a workflow orchestration tool, and it's used to schedule, monitor, and manage data workflows. It seamlessly integrates with Python code bases, which was a very important reason to choose Prefect in this case. And it allows flexible deployment and scaling options from cloud deployment, but also local deployment on hardware that is affordable. It has, of course, potential for parallelization if we come to a stage where the service could be shared with many users at the same time. On a more practical level, what Prefect does for us is that it provides a graphical user interface for initiating workflow runs and also lets us access workflow data through a graphical user interface and not only the command line. So to conclude, in the project, we have created a complete data pipeline and framework, most importantly, that we understand and can handle. We at the museum are not AI engineers, and I'm sure this perhaps is something that others have also experienced. It's hard enough to keep up with the development in this rapidly evolving technology field. So we need a solution that we can understand and handle. And the KIEBIDS framework does this for us. It's open source, open license, it's locally deployable, the hardware requirements can be met. And in implementing the KIEBIDS application, we try to not reinvent the wheel, rather to combine existing state-of-the-art frameworks. Very important for us is that KIEBIDS enables adaptability for newly emerging technologies, whether these can be deployed locally or over the cloud, and for alternative implementation of individual information extraction functions, and also for adaptability for different extraction goals. Perhaps we would like to extract information not only from collection labels, but also from other types of written material that we have in the museum and that also hold important biodiversity data. In this approach, we try to go from standard configurations of each component to adaptations for specific use cases if needed. So again, modularity and adaptation comes into play here. Last but not least, we provide file-based output in a standardized yet versatile format with PAGE-XML, one PAGE-XML file for each input image. The application is open source, open license, locally deployable. It's in this public GitHub repository, and we're excited to share this code base so anyone is able to try it out, to fork it, to open an issue, to open a discussion, and we very much look forward to interacting with a larger interest group and user base through the GitHub repository. What's the outlook on the further development of the application? Certainly, we can add to the user experience for more visual support and for better prefix integration, which we have until now only scratched the surface of. We definitely want and need to improve performance for handwritten sources, and we have some very exciting developments in some other projects that we hope to be able to integrate as another workflow into the KIEBIDS framework, because we have a good adaptability for simply adding new workflows into KIEBIDS. And then one exciting area would be to broaden approaches for semantic analysis of the contents. So that's not only about semantic tagging of individual parts of the text and about entity linking, but also, for example, for relation extraction from different parts of the text, even if they are context sparse, such as the labels. And then perhaps it's also important in the context of this 12-month project together with the ECO AI Lab to point out two framework or overall conditions for this type of work. First of all, expertise has come together from different domains. In our case, this was biological and collection management expertise on the one hand, software development and AI expertise on the other hand. And we think it is essential for any service or software that keeps being relevant to continue to work interdisciplinary in this respect. And of course, this also comes down to sustainable funding for software development and services. And in this case, the collaboration with the ECO AI Lab and our successful application for funding through the ECO AI Lab was a very interesting and helpful way to finance the whole operation. And the level of support and the level of development that we will be able to put into the KIEBIDS application will definitely also depend on future funding. So to wrap this up, I've showed this slide a couple of times for the object with the catalog number MBI0029. And this talk has been about the rather dry business of technical information extraction. And all of this comes to life when you actually look at the objects and work with the data. So what is MBI0029? It's this. If you look a little bit closer, you can see that it's a fossil. That this wing from the genus Elcana, from an extinct family that's separated from the living grasshoppers and crickets about 300 million years ago. And it becomes also clear why we have this drawing here of the wing, a reflection of the fossil.